Well, what do you say we hear a quick quote, an excerpt, if you will, a stream of consciousness dip into the late, great Nick Tosches.
The world is evil in the most boring way.
Yeah.
Listen to anybody who's out to save the world. They're out to grow fatter, richer, off of your ass.
Mm-hmm.
This is evil. I mean, charity. That's another great racket. People are just evil. Anybody, it's a world of evil. It's just that evil has become so boring. I mean, it's so dull.
Chapter 3 of the book I Want My MTV by Rob Tannenbaum and Craig Marks. Chapter title is We Were Just Idiots in Hotel Rooms. John Lack, Bob Pittman, and the Creation of MTV. If MTV had placed a help wanted ad, it might have read, Novice TV station seeks employees. Ideal candidates must love music, be willing to work long hours and drink a lot, and have no prior TV experience. It might seem odd that most of the network's original staff had little or no TV background. If you needed brain surgery, you wouldn't hire a doctor who just months ago was selling aluminum siding. But MTV wasn't brain surgery. Many of its most important founders came from radio backgrounds, which freed them from abiding by the existing rules of the TV industry. On the other hand, it also meant that they were bound to the existing rules of the radio industry, which soon proved to be an impediment. A successful startup requires dedication and imagination, but not necessarily enterprise. Steve Wozniak, the tech wizard who co-founded Apple Computer with Steve Jobs, as everyone that's been listening to the Van Halen episodes on the main feed already knows, has recalled that in the early days of the company, when he didn't know how to design a floppy disk or a printer interface, he'd make something up without knowing how other people do it, he added. All the best things I did at Apple came from A, not having money, and B, not having done it before ever. Similarly, MTV had little money and less experience. If there was a corporate culture, it was based on confidence and pugnaciousness, traits that began at the top of the company's masthead. In November 1979, Billboard magazine's first video music conference, a 4-day event at the Sheraton Universal Hotel in LA, brought together most of the nascent industry's pioneers. Todd Rundgren and Michael Nesmith showed their videos. John Roseman presented Bohemian Rhapsody, and Blondie's Eat to the Beat video disc, with videos for each song from the band's album of that same name, and record labels showed off clips by David Bowie, Meat Loaf, Bruce Springsteen, and Rod Stewart, among others. During a panel titled Video Music, Tomorrow is Here Today, John Lack declared his intention to start a 24-hour music video network. I got up and gave the presentation, which was pretty classy and elegant, Lack recalls. After he finished, Sidney Sheinberg spoke. Sheinberg was president of MCA and probably the most powerful executive at the conference. Sheinberg gets up and goes, "We ain't giving you our fucking music," says Lack, still sounding indignant about the slight. Meaning, the gall of this man to say, we're not handing over all this property to you because you have a TV station. We're just not going to hand it over to you for free. I mean, they'll change their minds later, I think that's what they do. I think they change their minds later. So Lack phoned his boss, Jack Schneider, and quoted Scheinberg's snub. And Schneider says, "We'll kick his ass, don't worry about him." MTV didn't even have a name yet, and the fight had already begun. Quote from John Lack, "A video radio station, that was my dream. I said video radio 1,000 times." Quote from James D. Robinson III, CEO, American Express. "American Express was interested in selling financial services into the home, and that led to my buying half of the Warner Cable Corporation in 1979 for $175 million. I did the deal with Warner Communications chairman Steve Ross, who was a fascinating guy. A simple deal bored him. A complex, tax-advantaged, convoluted structure really got his focus. Warner Cable founded Cube, that's Q-U-B-E, a state-of-the-art interactive TV programming system. And the technology was desirable for us. So Amex and Warner jointly formed Warner Amex Cable Communications that eventually split into two divisions. Warner Amex Cable Company, which built local cable systems, and Warner Amex Satellite Entertainment Company, or WASEC, which created and supplied programming and was run by Jack Schneider. I don't know where that accent came from, and I don't know if I'll remember to use it if James D. Robinson III, CEO, American Express, comes up again later. Let's find out together. Jack Schneider, MTV executive. I came to Warner Amex when it was created in 1979. I was president and chief executive officer of WASEC. I inherited the movie channel and Nickelodeon. I said, what can we do next? Bob Pittman, MTV executive. John Lack hired me in 1979 when I was young, a hot programmer at NBC Radio. John and Jack Schneider, the CEO of WASEC, decided that the world of cable was going to be all about specialized networks. Radio was a good model for that, so they wanted a radio programmer to work on the movie channel, which was the first 24-hour movie service. John Lack. Bob Pittman had long hair, one eye, and was out of his mind. All right, Bob Pittman's my hero already. I'm in. But he was brilliant. Jack Schneider said, "I'm not hiring some kid from radio to program movies. What are you, crazy? To program movies? To program movies. Oh, he can program radio, that's fine. Like 3-minute songs and commercial breaks and, host segments. But, oh, heaven forbid, he decides what 2-hour movie is going to go before another 2-hour movie. That just takes creativity and split-second decision-making, unlike radio." Oh, my God. Can't have some loose cannon radio guy deciding what 10 movies are going to play within a 24-hour loop on our stupid cable station. All right. Bob Pittman says, oh, I'm sorry, going back a sentence or two. Jack and I fought about it. One day he said, "Look, if we hire him, do I have to listen to your shit anymore?" Bob Pittman then says, "I grew up in Brookhaven, Mississippi, son of a Methodist preacher. Not only did I have one eye, but I was a small, skinny kid, plus I moved towns. We'd live in a town 2 years, 4 years, in towns where people had lived there for centuries. So it made me a bit of an outsider. I think it made me a pretty good observer of people because you do that to keep from getting beat up." I started in radio at 15 because I needed a job to pay for flying lessons, which was my hobby. I went to a couple of other stations in Mississippi, then Milwaukee, then Detroit, where I called myself the Mississippi Hippie. I talked someone into letting me program my first station in Pittsburgh at 19 and had big success. I went to Chicago, and they said, "We're going to change the station to country." I didn't know anything about country. And they go, "That's okay. You know all about research." I was one of the first programmers to use consumer research to figure out what music to play. In college, I'd been majoring in sociology with an emphasis on social methods research. Charlie Warner, radio executive. Bob had long hair down to his back and a full beard. He looked like he stepped out of a commune. His coiffure got shorter and more conservative as he moved up the corporate ladder. Coiffure. I'm sorry, I've never had to say that word in polite company. Rob Pittman says, I programmed the movie channel like a radio station. I figured, okay, there are the 5 most popular movies. I'm going to show them twice a day. These are not popular. I'm only going to show them every 4 days. John Lack, HBO went off the air at 2 a.m. Research showed that people wanted uncut, unedited movies 24 hours a day. So the movie channel went from 300,000 customers to 2 million in less than a year. The second channel we did was Nickelodeon. It wasn't called that in those days, but we began developing children's programming. The third channel I had on the drawing board was music. I traveled around Europe, and in every country you would see music shows with video clips. I thought we could show them 24 hours a day if we had permission. Sorry, I stumbled a bit there, and I was thinking about Nickelodeon. There are some really good YouTube videos about the history of Nickelodeon, as well as a Hulu documentary about the history of Nickelodeon. If you want to check those out, I highly recommend them if you're of an appropriate age. It is, it's almost moving at times, but I think that's because of the sort of tugging at your memories if you were a kid there's a good 20 years worth of documentary time where if you were a kid during Nickelodeon's growth from like 1980 something to 2000 and something, you're going to see, bits and pieces of your childhood in there and the stories of creatively what happened to make those shows as good as they were. Initially, there was a lot of just reruns of older cartoons and public television kids shows, especially some Canadian content and stuff. I took a bunch of notes a long time ago. It was at least 2 years ago about a YouTube comparison I wanted to do between Sesame Street and Pinwheel, which was the really. It's so Canadian and miserable. I don't know. I know how to explain it. I have extensive notes on how to explain it, but I'm just so worried I'm going to put a ton of time into editing the video and then have it struck down by YouTube for copyright, It's happened too many times, just using images of stuff or using video footage of stuff, and how many times I'm going to have to take it down and then recut it and then turn all the images backwards and gray them out or desaturate the colors. I don't know how to. I can't stay ahead of the algorithm and the AI bots that make it so that only the people that are already monetized on YouTube can make money on YouTube with repurposed footage of movies and TV shows and copyrighted audio. But if you've never seen Pinwheel, but you remember Sesame Street, I highly recommend at some point today, you just go on YouTube, maybe, or whatever your website video viewing platform of choice is, and just do a search original Sesame Street intro and then original or the only Pinwheel intro, and the differences are stark. They are like Sesame Street is filled with a multi-ethnic gang of people, adults and children, bouncing around to a very bright sounding jazz guitar, sort of, or R&B guitar intro. It's got a consistent, steady beat to it, and then high pitched kids or somebody sounding like kids singing in falsetto, in harmony, and it's celebratory, and there's a lot of chord changes, bum 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 bum. It's very New York, very 60s, 70s, very American, and it's full of energy. It's full of different colors of people's clothing and different environments, different sort of bits of terrain that you see kids running around on or adults gathering together at. And then you watch the Pinwheel introduction, and it's all ugly muted colors and stop motion animation of it looks like a painted If I was an artist that could pull that off, I would be very proud of myself. Let me say that for sure. I'm not crapping on the execution of the art and the animation, but it's so dour, and the color palette is very muted, and the production of the song is very muted. It's like it's music for children that are already addicted to painkillers or something. There's no edge to it. It's very soft and pipey, you know. Boop, 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 boop. It's supposed to be like a calliope kind of music, but there's no attack on the notes, and it's just, oh God. Of course, I didn't register this as a child. I just saw it when I was over at my mom's friends' places when the folks that were doing well enough to have cable in Washington State in the 1980s. It was a crazy thing to be able to watch, and the parents were just happy that you were in the living room not being loud because you were in a house that had cable. But there's ugly puppets. Like the Muppets are very pleasing to the eye. They know Henson had this. God damn it! I'm gonna have to take a lot of this. Maybe I'll take this out and put it in the YouTube video. I don't know. But Henson had an eye for design and for character design that was very endearing, just like Walt Disney did. Just, you know, he knew consciously how to create physical puppets that were the kind of thing that kids would listen to and pay attention to, and even adults would interact with when you see the celebrity guest, you know, segments on the Muppet Show or Sesame Street. And it's very clear that he and his people, his other puppeteers, you know, his design crew, knew what they were doing. The stuff on the Canadian design people up doing the pinwheel thing for late 70s, early 80s. They're so ugly and awful. And I've seen uglier and more awful on old footage of like Chicago area kids shows with a human host that's doing all the puppet voices himself and stuff. And oh God, it's disgusting. A friend of mine streamed it live on a weekend. My buddy Max Pearson. The Giggle Snort Hotel is what it was called, and it's a nightmare. It's like somebody put Somas, you know, or Quaaludes in candy corn and fed it to a bunch of kids and then recorded the kids' dreams. It's awful, and it's jarring, and it's not fun. It's not cute. It's not engaging either. Where was I? Oh, MTV. That's right. There's no cuts, by the way. That wasn't an edit. That was me finally pulling my own proverbial head out of my tuchus and getting back to the page here. The Mississippi hippie went to Chicago he's doing country radio. Let's see. We had the third channel was video clips of music. Right. He could show them 24 hours a day. The next quote is from Jack Schneider, who said, "We needed cheap programming, which means we needed somebody to give us the programming." Right. Because, I mean, that's an essential, the core part of the evil of what MTV becomes, right? Like initially it's sort of like, well, what else are you guys doing with your videos? Are they showing on TV anywhere else? Do you want someone to see them? Do you want people to come to your shows? It worked out better for the new wave bands than it did the old arena bands from the 70s that were big holdouts. I think we'll get into that in a later chapter. But anyway, he says, the world did not know that the record companies had videos. But I knew, because Columbia Records once reported to me when I was executive vice president at CBS. Michael Nesmith, yes, that Michael Nesmith from the Monkees, says, "I haven't talked about my role in the development of MTV, but this would be a good time to do that. I was driving in my car. It was an early evening, and I thought, what you could do is you could put together a television show or a television channel that played videos all the time." And the name Pop Clips came into my mind. I talked to Jerry Perencio, who was my first agent and has since made a big name for himself as a media tycoon. Fair. I have no idea who this is, but made a big name for himself, evidently, among other scumbags. Jerry was in business with Norman Lear, There we go. I recognize that. And they had All in the Family. We made a pilot with half a dozen of these clips. You Light Up My Life and Paul McCartney's Mull of Kintyre. Introduced by comedians like Howie Mandel and Charles Fleischer. Wow, I think Charles Fleischer is the guy that was in... he was the voice of Roger Rabbit, and I think he was in Demon Knight after that, and that was about it. I won't stop recording now to check that, but I will check that. We were unable to sell it. The pushback from television was profound. I went to a meeting with one guy who said, look, music doesn't work on television. It never has. It never will. Is he ignoring the many, many years of music and dance variety shows on mainstream network television? Is he ignoring Hee Haw? You know, the Barbara Mandrell show, the Johnny Cash program, those are all country. The Brady Bunch Variety Hour. I mean, as well as just years and years and years of music and dance on television. Good Lord. How do you think Liberace got as huge as he was? Actually, I have nothing to back that up or verify it, but I mean, I just feel like TV was a medium that helped him out a lot. You know, guys like him and Tiny Tim. Good Lord, that's so foolish. I don't understand. I mean, there's no context for that quote that'll make this better for me. Damn it. All right, that was an edit. I did stop and go look at my encyclopedias of Charles Fleischer history. And it turns out, yes, he is the person I'm thinking of. He was born in 1950. Actor, stand-up comic, musician, and writer from Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And he was in A Nightmare on Elm Street. Jesus Christ. He had a cameo in Back to the Future Part 2. Polar Express, Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. All right, fine, whatever. So yeah, he was the voices of a Roger Rabbit, Benny the Cab, Greasy, and Psycho in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And he was in Welcome Back, Kotter as Carvelli. And Chuck on Laverne and Shirley. All right, that's good to know. He had a guest part as a guy in a band in the Weird Al show. Good heavens. He performed the role of televangelist on What God Wants Part 2 on Roger Waters' 1992 album Amused to Death. I'm going to go look that up. I'm going to go check that out tonight. Fantastic. I'm still annoyed it doesn't say who he was in Nightmare on Elm Street. He was doing a lot of stuff, though, in the late 70s, early 80s. Hill Street Blues, Night Shift. Goddamn. He was Dr. King in A Nightmare on Elm Street. So he's probably one of the guys in the... during the sequence where Nancy is being tested for psychosis or whatever and having her vitals monitored while she's, going to go to sleep and dream or whatever, and to study what happens while she's having these terrible nightmares where Freddy's coming to get her. Aren't you glad you heard me go on that little side quest? I know you are. Okay, now let's go back to 45 RPM by Jim Dawson and Steve Probst. Chapter 3, Getting Up to Speed. On June 19, 1948, Columbia chairman Ed Wallerstein formally introduced the LP to the press and the music industry in a banquet room at Manhattan's posh Waldorf Astoria Hotel. He stood at the podium flanked by an 8-foot tower of 78s on one side and a 15-inch pile of 33 1/3s on the other. Smart. I can see where this is going already. These, he said, nodding at the stack of 78s kept in place by a vertical shelf, hold the same music as these. He gestured down at the much smaller heap of LPs. It was a perfect visual image of compression, compactness, and efficiency. When he finished his speech, Wallerstein added a similarly impressive auditory display by playing a piece of classical music on one of his company's Masterworks 78s. After 4 minutes, the platter abruptly ran out of music in mid-passage. Then I took the corresponding LP and played it on the little Philco attachment right past that break in the music, he later recalled. The reception was terrific. The critics were struck not only by the length of the record, but also by the quietness of its surface and its greatly increased fidelity. They were convinced that a new era had come to the music business. And about time, too. The old 78 was mostly shellac, a word taken from the Sanskrit lakh, L-A-H-K, meaning 100,000, because shellac was a product of the amber-colored, resinous secretions of countless tiny beetles, Laccifer, lacca, feeding on the sap of rubber trees, found only in parts of India and Southeast Asia. In the record-making process, shellac was used as a binder for various neutral filler materials, including carbon black, which gave records their dark color, and other powders, molded together by extreme heat. Among the ingredients always present were thousands of ground-up bodies of those insects that had produced shellac in the first place. Their tiny carcasses seemed a primitive material for such an up-to-date industry as the record business. By contrast, the main ingredient in the LP was a synthetic resin plastic. What we know as the commercial plastic industry didn't begin until 1907, when a Belgium-born American inventor named Leo Baekeland, B-A-E-K-E-L-A-N-D, discovered a carbolic acid and formaldehyde-based substitute for shellac in his riverside barn near Yonkers, New York. He found that when he baked his liquid goo at a high temperature, it became a hard, translucent substance molded into any shape he wanted. Baekeland called it Bakelite. His general, Bakelite Corporation, subsequently became part of the Union Carbide and Carbon Company, now Union Carbide Corporation, which improved upon Baekeland's original plastic and in 1930 came up with a flexible compound of polyvinyl chloride and vinyl acetate called Vinylite, whose first major application was a protective coating on the insides of beer cans to keep the beverage's natural salts from reacting with the metal. The second major application and Vinylite's introduction to the record business had been Victor's aborted Micro Groove project. That sounds like a great funk band. The Micro Groove project. Then, a decade later, Victor got another chance to exploit the plastic material when it signed a contract with the U.S. government to press V-discs at its Camden plant for the Armed Forces Radio Service, AFRS, during World War II. The V-disc project began after the American Federation of Musicians Union went on strike in mid-1942 to get higher royalties from record companies to offset their perceived losses from radio and jukebox play. The companies refused to go along with these demands, so for the next 2 years, musicians were not allowed to set foot inside a recording studio. However, the Armed Forces Radio Service convinced the Union to sign a waiver to allow musicians to record exclusively for Allied troops around the world as part of their patriotic duty. Once the ink was on the contract, the next problem was to find a replacement for shellac. The AFRS had already been having problems with most of its brittle transcription discs arriving in jigsaw pieces at military bases around the world. Worse, the Japanese were occupying French Indochina, America's main source of imported shellac, and what little was available had to be earmarked for electrical insulation as part of the war effort. To maintain a fresh inventory of music, record companies were forced to buy up old 78s and crush them into dust to add to the mix of new records. Since the Army was already using Carbide's Vinylite for electrical equipment and life rafts, the AFRS began to press their V-disc 78s using a watered-down form of a Vinylite called Formvar. As the only outlet for America's top recording artists during the studio ban, the new V-discs were an immediate hit with the troops. During the first week alone, 1,780 boxes, each containing 30 V-discs, and a complement of playing needles were shipped to Europe and into the Pacific Theater. By 1945, Victor's Camden plant had shipped more than 4 million records, along with 125,000 spring-wound V-disc phonographs and millions of steel needles to grind into them. When troops remained overseas after the war, as part of the Marshall Plan, the V-Disc project continued to provide them with music for another couple of years. Yet David Sarnoff and RCA Victor never took advantage of their position as V-Disc's main manufacturer until William Paley uncloaked the long-play vinyl record and the kinder, gentler tone arm. After a quiet summer, Columbia released its first 14 LPs. In September 1948, keeping mostly to its classical masterworks line, because the decade's second musicians' strike had paralyzed much of the popular music business since the beginning of the year. 12-inch LPs, limited at this point to classical works, retailed at $4.85. Classical 10-inch LPs at $3.85. And popular music, 10-inch LPs, at $2.95. Columbia not only superseded the 78 album with this new long play format, but also appropriated the name. An album is a book of pages or sleeves, which is what the original record albums were. Whereas the LP was a single vinyl record inside a cardboard jacket, hardly an album per se, but the public never questioned the misnomer. To play this shiny new record, Philco, working in partnership with Columbia, introduced a $29.95 adapter unit. A motorized 33 1/3 turntable with a featherweight tone arm in a shallow 15 by 4-inch box that could plug into the speaker system of existing radios and record players. Philco also brought out a more expensive console with dual arm changer that could play both LPs and 78s. Meanwhile, RCA Victor was surreptitiously working to bring its own system online. On December 11, 1948, Jim Murray, a vice president at the company's Hollywood office, invited his recording artists to a special viewing of the new 45 player in his office. Rather than arrive as a group for a formal demonstration, they wandered in whenever the schedules allowed, and Murray dazzled them with the new product. This, he told them one by one, is the most sensational innovation in the music industry since the introduction of electrical recording in 1925. In New York City, RCA unveiled the 45 for a gathering of hardware and record manufacturers. But journalists were already on the case. Some gossip that has come to our ears describes the imminent appearance of a disc, which would revolve at a speed in the 40s, wrote Irving Kolodin in a November issue of Saturday Morning Review of Literature. Music columnist Joe Kaida blew its cover a month later in the December 4 issue of Billboard, proclaiming, RCA Victor is not going to put on 33 1/3. The company is going to put out a 45 RPM record with no long-playing feature whatsoever. So it boils down to this. No matter what anybody says or writes, the record business, as of early spring 1949, will have 3 types of records available to consumers. RCA remained mum on the subject for fear of inhibiting Christmas shoppers from buying its current crop of 78s and 78 record players. Not until the beginning of the new year did RCA Victor's general manager, Paul Barkmeyer, officially released the full details. Billboard, in its January 8, 1949 edition, touted the imminent 45 in banner headlines. Lowdown on new RCA disc. According to the subhead, Changer is heart of new player unit. Quoting unnamed industry sources, Billboard said that RCA was bringing out not only a new type, new speed record, but it is introducing a completely new phonograph system that constitutes a combination of evolutionary steps in the industry. The player, the heart of which is a new automatic changer mechanism, will be made available in an adapter unit, which may be hooked up to any present radio or phonograph, as well as in the form of a complete player unit, which merely needs to be plugged into any socket and in various combinations. The spindle is actually the most revolutionary aspect of the mechanism. Unlike the present-day spindles, the RCA spindle measures about 1 5/8 inches in diameter. And into this spindle is built the complete changer mechanism. About an inch below the head of the spindle, 2 tiny prongs extend from each side of the spindle. The new platters actually rest on these prongs and drop onto the turntable in order once the changer is activated. RCA offered this new system in various combinations and prices. The cheapest self-contained player was a small black plastic unit, roughly 9 inches square and less than 5 inches deep, with a 3-tube amplifier, a 4-inch speaker, and a golden spindle, with a matching golden tone arm. Man, if you had the guts of that thing today and you could just put it, if I could just solder an input jack onto that thing, I bet it would be a really wild sounding guitar amplifier. or a good little sort of distortion box for your harmonica microphone too. The format was also going to include let's try take two. The format was also going to be included in many of RCA's upcoming radio and television consoles. Use take two, including its top-of-the-line Ultra Deluxe Berkshire model, a fancy piece of furniture that contained everything but the kitchen sink. The Billboard article also verified rumors that the new disc would play at 45 RPM and measure 6 7/8 inches in diameter. The record, said Billboard, quoting an RCA press release, was developed with the express objective of obtaining 100% undistortion. Or, put another way, creating a record which is completely free of surface noises or distortion of any kind. At the end of the article came an added piece of information that signaled the coming Battle of the Titans. An important factor about the new RCA record, which must be borne in mind, is that it has no long play feature as such at all. Popular, hillbilly, and such recorded items, for example, will play at their established length of approximately 3 minutes. Classical and other normal 12-inch items will play at the same length as usual, roughly 5 minutes. Whatever long playing factor may be said to exists in the fact that if 9 of the new records playing 5 1/10 minutes each were placed on the changer, the capacity will be built at 9 records, though 10 or 12 may fit on it. The listener would get some 45 minutes of music, interrupted only by the split second between the time one record ends and another begins through the operations of the changer mechanism. The article added that except for the smallest portable unit, RCA's new record players would also accommodate 78s because of a 2-speed mechanism and the detachability of the spindle. To further promote the new system, RCA was granting other manufacturers royalty-free use of its final working blueprints for their entire record player mechanism, as well as the vinylite discs themselves. Billboard noted that the introduction of the new RCA player and platter in the spring will mark the beginning of a historic disc battle between Camden characters and the Columbia gang from Bridgeport, Connecticut, home of Columbia's record lab. In many ways, the tussle is likely to turn out as fraught with significance and ultimate effect as the old battle between the cylinder and the first record. At the same time, the trade paper cautioned, it is of prime importance that all factions contribute as little to the inherent confusion as possible and work as hard as they can to hold any confusion to a minimum. Now, how about we jump back into the Monster Magnet conversation that we left off at last time between Sean Isolt of White Zombie and Dave Windorf of Monster Magnet from 1994-ish or 5. The next subject they broach is one that is very near and very dear to my heart.
If you could be a comic book character, what would you be?
Spider-Man.
Oh,
He's the coolest
you knew
guy.
that right off the bat.
I always wanted to be Spider-Man.
He's pretty cool, actually.
Spider-Man was the coolest guy because he was a nerd, you know? He was a ghost in high school, too. He was
Yeah.
he was this guy that nobody paid attention to, and he pretty much lived in his own imagination. Had a tiny little life that did nothing, but his imagination was huge. And then he got to turn into Spider-Man and go crazy and fight guys like the Green Goblin, and as it turned out, he went from being this like little nerdy guy to being pretty much of a huckster. You know, he would sell pictures of Spider-Man to the newspaper to get money. So he'd take pictures of himself and then make a buck off it.
I never knew that about Spider-Man.
He was a pretty sly little guy. But that's the one I would most want to be like. But the one I most feel like is probably somebody at a Weird War or the Incredible Hulk sometimes. Not by choice.
That's when you're destroying guitars and monitors and things like that.
It's a Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing.
Yeah, anyone in your path. Cool.
Oh, those two are so adorable together. It makes me so happy. Makes me so happy to listen to them talk to each other.